From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Immigration arrests in Colorado have quadrupled since President Trump returned to office in January. Under Trump, immigration and customs enforcement officials say they're focused on deporting violent criminals who are here in the U.S. illegally, what the president calls the worst of the worst. But in Colorado, that promise doesn't line up with who is actually being detained by immigration enforcement. A new investigation by the Colorado Sun and the Wyoming news organization WyoFile found that during the first 5 months of this year, about 60% of people arrested by ICE in Colorado and neighboring Wyoming had no criminal convictions when ICE detained them. And of those, only a small fraction have actually been convicted of a violent crime, such as assault. Colorado Sun reporter Taylor Dalvin has been covering immigration under the Trump administration. She joined me to talk about their findings and why they wanted to take a closer look at these arrests.
We were really interested in looking at whether ICE's enforcement on the ground matches what it says it's doing. The Trump administration has been really clear that its immigration enforcement is about public safety. It's referenced, like you said, people the administration defines as the worst of the worst, violent criminals, bloodthirsty criminals. And so we wanted to see if that's actually what's happening. And we were able to get this ICE data, which is imperfect, but probably the best look at what the agency says it's doing. And we're able to look at both the increase in arrests and the criminal history of people who have been arrested.
And your reporting found a surge in arrests of immigrants who had no criminal convictions at the time of their arrest. The numbers tripled from the year before in Wyoming and quadrupled in Colorado. Taylor, could you give us a few key numbers? How many people have recently been detained in Colorado and what kind of criminal history did they have?
Yeah, so we looked at all of the arrests that ICE says it made in Colorado from January 20th to June 26th of this year and of last year under the Biden administration. And so we found that under the Biden administration, 61% of people arrested had criminal convictions. And under the Trump administration, only 39% had criminal convictions.
You kept the time frame consistent. You looked specifically at immigration arrests during the first 5 months of 2025 under the new Trump administration, and you compared it to the same time period in 2024 under Biden. What stood out to you when you compared these two timeframes under two different administrations?
Yeah, I think the most glaring difference is really the proportion of people arrested who have criminal convictions. So this matches a lot of what we're hearing from advocates in immigrant communities on the ground who say that a lot of people without criminal convictions are being swept up in this mass deportation plan.
ICE did not release this information easily. I'm wondering, Taylor, how challenging was it to gather and analyze this data?
So the data for this story comes from the University of California, Berkeley Law School that actually sued the ICE agency to get this data from them and were kind enough to publish the data on their website for anyone to download and analyze. So that's exactly what we did. My colleague Sandra Fish really spearheaded the analysis of the data, and we were able to pull out these findings based on what ICE had reported and released to the law school.
And when you got the data, you reached out to ICE for confirmation of your reporting, as journalists do. You wrote in your story that the agent who responded didn't want to go on the record about it. How unusual is that response for a spokesperson from a government agency?
Yeah, it's really unusual. A spokesperson, their entire job is to provide on-the-record information in response to press inquiries. And so it's really unusual that a spokesperson wouldn't want to be quoted or have their name attached to the information they're sharing. I think this seems to follow a similar trend. We've seen ICE officers making arrests in the field using masks and also not wanting to be identified. So there seems to be a level of concern about their identities being out there.
I want to talk about some of the response since the story came out. you heard from Colorado's Republican Congressman Gabe Evans, who largely supports Trump's immigration policy. He had feedback about your story. What was his response?
I think we didn't reach out to any politicians for comment. We really just put the data up there for people to interpret as they wanted to. But I think he had some thoughts. So there are 3 categories of criminal history of people being arrested. There's people with criminal convictions, people who've been charged with a crime, and people who have not been charged nor convicted or only have immigration violations.
Okay.
And so he had said something about how, people charged with crimes should also be considered in this sort of dangerous category. And I think it's important to know that even when you look at both people charged and convicted, the proportion of people in that category has decreased under Trump.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 79% of people under Biden had either convictions or charges, and just 67% under Trump. So there is a shift, no matter how you look at it, in the immigration policy and who is being swept up in this enforcement.
And what were some of the most common charges that you came across in your research?
Yeah, so my colleague Sandra Fish, who handled all of the data and did a lot of the heavy lifting here, she was able to look and find for each person arrested in Colorado, their most serious criminal conviction, if they had a conviction. And so the most common conviction among those who had one was for drunk driving. Of the 2,000 people arrested in Colorado, we only found 103 that had assault convictions and 22 that had sex assault convictions.
So out of about 2,000 people arrested this year in Colorado, only
about 125.
So roughly 5% had some kind of violent assault conviction.
Yeah.
So finally, Taylor, your story notes that federal funding for ICE is increasing quite a bit, from $8 billion to $28 billion. What happens next in this story?
A lot of that funding, it seems like, is going to go to increasing the country's immigrant detention capacity. And so I've looked at some of the proposals to reopen long closed prisons in Colorado and use them as detention facilities. We already have an ICE detention facility in Aurora operated by the private prison company Geo Group, but there's a lot of interest among private prison companies to reopen facilities for that. So I'm really interested in that. I also think, we looked at just the arrest data. Every single line in this data is a person, and they have a story. And so I really want to keep reporting on this and talk to people who've been affected by this policy.
Taylor Dolphin is a reporter with the Colorado Sun. She spoke with me about their recent analysis of immigration arrest data in Colorado and Wyoming. We'll include a link to that story in the show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.